Lindy Hop was created by black dancers in and around Harlem in the late 1920s. But why is this important to know? If this dance features a dancer's individuality, why is the history of other dancers relevant?
Savoy, it wins you at a glance. Savoy gives happy feet a chance to dance.
For me, the reasons are intangible, but the more I learn, the more meaningful it becomes. For a tiny window into this history, I want to look at lyrics of some of the music that was popular during the time that Lindy Hop was in its heyday. So before we get into it, thank you people of Patreon for helping to make this video free for everybody in the world, including people like you. On my Patreon, there will be a link to a playlist of all the songs I reference in this video. If you want to help me out, head on over to my Patreon. The link's in the description. Music in the jazz age was just like music now. The musicians were talking about things that were happening to them and to their friends at that moment in the place where they were. Now, some of this stuff is still happening to people and will happen forever. The kind of person you would fall in love with, being sad that that person doesn't love you back, falling in love, falling out of love, breaking up with somebody, cheating, missing your ex, feeling vindicated that your ex misses you. Lots of relationship stuff. That's a forever formula. But some of these topics were very specific to the time, and those references can go right over our head. Okay, some of them are obvious, like the World War II stuff.
Say you, what can you do? Will you do it for the good of your country?
Wars have been, the night has high. So let's be wise. We'll trick those nasty, nasty spies. I'll give you warning, 'cause I'm afraid you have to raid. So take my warning, or else you'll get this hand grenade.
I mean, if you know anything about history, it's like hard not to get that. Some things we kind of get from like an old-timey, different standards of living sort of sense.
I'm gonna tell you, baby, we gonna move away from you. I don't want no ice, man. I'm gonna buy me a Frigidaire when we move way out on the outskirts of town.
Don't want no Iceman, gonna get a Frigidaire. All right, refrigerators were new, not everybody had them, and you didn't want somebody poking around your house offering ice to your lady. Some lyrics were designed for a specific inside group. For example, slang. Jazz musicians made up a ton of slang. For example, Lester Young, who is credited with popularizing the word cool as we use it today. Hey man, that's a cool song. Would ask, how does the bread smell when asked about a gig? Referencing, I'm assuming, when you are a breadwinner, you're the one that makes the money. That is poetic. Some words and phrases have been added to the larger culture.
Give me some skin.
Boy, got to do it.
Give me some skin.
I's a muggin' boom, daddy-daddy. I's a muggin' bang, daddy-daddy.
And some we can intuit from context clues.
Every Moses on his toes, I mean the joint is jumping. No time for talking. This place is walking, yes. Hit the jug and cut the rug. I say the joint is jumping. Listen.
In 1938, Cab Calloway actually published a dictionary of slang called the Webster's Dictionary, and it is so good. You need to stop this video and check it out right now. There are so many good things. Armstrongs are super high trumpet notes. Got your glasses on, you are ritzy or snooty, you fail to recognize your friend. Sam got you, you've been drafted into the army. That's good. Just like today, musicians would call out the names of their favorite celebrities. For example,
See Jackie Robinson hit that ball. Hit went zooming across the left field wall. Yeah, boy. Yes, Jackie hit that ball.
now we're getting into some big stuff. There's a story here. Obviously, Jackie Robinson was super important to many jazz musicians and fans of the time. Joining the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947, he famously broke the color line, enduring a torrent of racial abuse in the process when he became the first black baseball player to join the major leagues in the modern era. Baseball was segregated in 1889. It is hypothesized that this move to integrate baseball was influenced by the integration of jazz, which had begun 10 years earlier in 1936, when Benny Goodman asked Teddy Wilson to play piano in his trio. This was the first time a black person had appeared on stage with a white band. During the song, they also dropped the names of other prominent baseball players in the Negro Leagues, a fact I did not know and find so cool. All the shout-outs to the heroes.
Satchel Paige is mellow, so is Campanello, Newcomb and Dobie too. But it's a natural fact, when Jackie comes to bat, the
The team is through.
Roy Campanella and Don Newcombe also went on to play for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Now, not everyone loved Jackie Robinson. He was a black man playing America's pastime and a civil rights activist. America was still very segregated. Jackie was signed on in 1947. The armed forces weren't desegregated until 1948. Schools were still segregated until 1954. Jim Crow prevented Jackie Robinson from staying in the hotels and eating in the same restaurants as his teammates. The manager of the Dodgers, Branch Rickey, knew that the first black person to join the team would be subjugated to intense racial abuse and public scrutiny. He would have to be more than a talented player. He would have to be a strong, emotionally controlled person who would not get into confrontation when encountering hostility and insult. Plenty of times I wanted to haul off when somebody insulted me for the color of my skin, but I had to hold myself. I knew I was kind of an experiment. The whole thing was bigger than me. Learning about all of this conflict and courage and its place in time really gives me a sense of the pride musicians and listeners must have felt when they heard this song. Moving away from lyrics, even the titles of songs are full of references to the lives of these artists and to the lives of the people listening to and dancing to their music. Music today is categorized by genre: jazz, hip-hop, folk, rock, etc. But music between 1920 and 1940 had an additional category: race. Black music was labeled under race records and was advertised to black audiences. This was great business for the record labels because it was easy to underpay and exploit the black musicians. Additionally, because race records were only marketed towards black audiences, white audiences largely had no idea that there was such good music out there, so they didn't buy the records. So black musicians got less exposure, less money, a shorter career. Additionally, it was easier for white artists to get fame and money for simply ripping off an existing artist's style. Symphony Sid was the nickname of radio DJ Sid Torin, originally Sidney Tarnopol. Symphony Sid played predominantly, if not exclusively, race records, and many have credited him with bringing bebop to the masses through his live radio broadcasts that reached listeners in 30-plus states. He also championed earlier forms of jazz, modern jazz, and R&B, rhythm and blues, the rebranded name of race records. Symphony Sid was a white man, and today he receives criticism for benefiting from the black musicians that he championed and possibly taking jobs away from black DJs. However, in his time, it seems that he was viewed as an ally. He received many awards from black organizations, including Disc Jockey of the Year for continuous promotion of Negro artists. History is complicated, times and expectations change. On its face, it might appear that this is a song about architecture, but the Airshaft itself has a rich history. Exterior windows weren't mandatory until the 1880s, which pause for a second to think about how miserable it would be to live in a building without exterior windows. Developers wanted to comply with the law without losing a lot of space and money. So for 2 decades, this led to the construction of buildings with an interior air shaft so narrow that neighbors could reach across and shake hands with each other. Now you can imagine that if you're on the bottom floor, this does not improve your situation. Rather than being a source of light, air shafts quickly evolved into a source of disease and noise. This is where you would throw your trash and human waste. The fire department even complained that air shafts, while not providing fresh air for tenants, in case of fire, provided enough oxygen for that fire to spread quickly. There's even a New York Times story from 1885 that talks about an Irish immigrant who's distraught by her husband's late night habits and is going to end it all by jumping out of the window, and there's so much trash at the bottom that she escapes unharmed. That is gross. And also real sad. Now, in spite of all this, Duke Ellington has a quote about air shafts that makes them sound downright romantic. Take Harlem Airshaft. So much goes into a Harlem Airshaft. You get the full essence of Harlem in an airshaft. You hear fights, you smell dinner, you hear people making love, you hear intimate gossip floating down, you hear the radio. An airshaft is one great big loudspeaker. You hear people praying, fighting, snoring. Jitterbugs are jumping up and down, always over you, never below you. That's the funny thing about jitterbugs, they're always over you. I tried to put all that in Harlem Airshaft. Stepin Fetchit, aka the laziest man on earth, was the stage name of Lincoln Perry, who was an incredibly successful and controversial actor who got his start in the vaudeville Chitlin circuit and then began acting in 1927. He was the first black actor to receive screen credit in a film and also the first black actor to become a millionaire, and he showed it off too. He had an extravagant lifestyle of cars and cashmere suits and Hollywood parties, and of course, being the first anything, he opened up the doors for people to follow. However, his character was deeply controversial. The way I understand it, he was lazy, dull-witted, often seemed not to know where he was. Looking back at his performances, they seem very offensive. His character was a gross stereotype of what white people thought black people actually were, and that performance validated that incorrect and damaging assumption. However, of course, the story is more complicated than that. The way many black audience members read the character, Stepin Fetchit's act was an act wherein he undermined his white oppressors by denying labor and cooperation through an act of defiance, which included the appearance of laziness and dim-wittedness. And eventually, the white oppressors would just be so frustrated they would go and do it themselves. One critic noted that Stepin Fetchit never actually fetched anything. He would extend this character into real life on set as well. When presented with lines he didn't like, he just pretended not to understand them. In addition, Stepin Fetchit talked in such a way that white ears heard gibberish and black ears heard covert, barbed insults to the man. Stepin Fetchit was at the peak of his career in the mid-1930s. Now think about how old Whitey's Lindy Hoppers were in the mid-1930s. I know there are so many dancers, I'm sorry for not naming them all. Now, if these dancers went to the movies, it's entirely likely that they saw Stepin Fetchit films and were familiar with his work. How might it have affected their early sense of self? I'm not sure when this song was recorded, I think 1945 or 1946, but there's also a different, identical, but faster song called Elmer's Tune. Which song came first? Why was the title changed? I don't know, but if you know, let me know. Some of these inside references are place specific, kind of like if you go to a comedy show and the comedian's like, make some noise if you're from New York! Now make some noise if you're from this specific street, in this specific neighborhood, in New York! I mean, they got specific. Because this is where they lived. This was their neighborhood. Now I'm sure we all hear the songs about our beloved ballroom, home of Happy Feet.
Savoy,
Savoy!
Savoy, Savoy.
And we're probably also familiar with the songs about that specific neighborhood.
Harlem,
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 Harlem, Harlem,
Harlem, Harlem,
Harlem.
We probably even know about the A train.
Hurry, 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 take the A train to find the quickest way to get to Harlem.
Opening in 1932, the A train is the longest route in the New York City subway system and ranks at the bottom of the 20 subway lines. It is the most prone to breakdowns and delays. However, it was the quickest way to get to Harlem. Billy Strayhorn wrote this song based on written directions that Duke Ellington gave him to get to Ellington's house up in Sugar Hill, way up in Harlem. Sugar Hill was where Harlem royalty lived during the Harlem Renaissance and included people like Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, Jimmy Lunsford, Coleman Hawkins, Lena Horne, Billy Strayhorn, Count Basie. That is amazing! So many of these people lived so close to each other, went and saw each other at these same tiny clubs, jammed at each other's houses. No wonder why jazz evolved so quickly. But Harlem was also home to historical civil rights titans like W.E.B. Du Bois, prolific author and one of the foremost black intellectuals of the Harlem Renaissance, author and poet Langston Hughes, Aaron Douglas, the father of Black American art, Walter Francis White, the leader of the NAACP from 1929 to 1955, Roy Wilkins, executive secretary and executive director of the NAACP for 21 years, Thurgood Marshall, the Supreme Court's first black justice, Marcus Garvey, who organized the first important American black nationalist movement, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who represented Harlem in the House of Representatives from 1945 until 1971. Some people incorrectly believe that all of Harlem was a slum. Sugar Hill was fancy.
No matter where you go, Every joint is jumping now. All the sugar hillers are a bunch of killer dillers. I'm trying to set you right. You can see most any old thing in Harlem on Saturday night.
The main street is St. Nicholas Ave. That's where Duke lived.
Way up on St. Nicholas Avenue.
The main park is Jackie Robinson Park. The Cotton Club and the Savoy Ballroom were on Lenox Avenue, which in 1987 was also named Malcolm X Boulevard. New York references are everywhere. Now all of these places and references had a specific location and a vibe and a smell and a clientele, and all of this would be understood by the people who were listening to the music, by the people who were dancing to the music. Harlem is covered with remembrances of Black heroes and activists. As I get deeper and deeper into learning more about these lyrics and song titles, that's one of the main themes that repeatedly jumps out at me: Black pride. Repeatedly, these artists take difficult or impossible circumstances and transform them into captivating, sophisticated art that speaks of resilience, style, modernity, intelligence, grace, and power. So many of these jazz songs are about overcoming adversity, about turning something difficult, unfair, or cruel into something beautiful, about celebrating Black victories. Living side by side with these jazz musicians and dancers are the civil rights leaders whose names are remembered on the Harlem streets and buildings to this day. Harlem is a place of Black pride. Jazz is a music of Black pride. Lindy Hop is a dance of Black pride. Maybe researching all of this doesn't benefit my dancing in a measurable, tangible way, but honestly, dancing is art, meaning it's subjective. Who's to say this is less beneficial than something like turn technique? In addition, Lindy Hop didn't just appear out of thin air in the 1980s. It has a lineage, which is made of history, which is made of, in part, stories like these. How can I add something of value to the fabric that is Lindy Hop if I don't have any connection or understanding to the circumstances that brought about Lindy Hop? Like, I know it's about individuality, but how can I bring my opinions into a conversation without first understanding what the conversation is about? There are so many more references than those covered by this video. This is not a comprehensive list. Let me know what I missed. What are your favorite stories? What are your favorite songs? How does this make you feel about the musicians and dancers of the day and their impact on today? Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.